Good evening, everybody. Glad that so many folks are joining us tonight for an important conversation. I wish it could be more of a conversation. It's gonna be a lot of me talking, unfortunately, but it's the nature of the beast with this topic and the online setting. It's been an incredibly challenging couple weeks after an incredibly challenging 16 months for the Jewish community. And the situation in Israel and the incredible rise in anti-Semitic incidents. In England, I think it was 438%. Here in the United States, it was an 80% increase, has hit us incredibly hard, and we as a community need to talk about it. There are lots of opinions out there when it comes to Israel and her response. Most of them are so far from the truth, and the lies and the distortions need to be called out. The lies and the propaganda have one underlying purpose, and that is to delegitimize the state of Israel, get rid of her. Tonight, my attempt, my effort, my desire is to share the facts that I expect you to use to counter the delegitimization campaign out there. You can be Israel's best ally. We're going to cover a lot of material tonight. In some ways, too much material. As I've been preparing over the past several days, I realized I could have done a discussion each night. And I'm thrilled that we have so many people joining us, but I also know that time is precious and I want to try to cram in as much information as possible. We are recording this event. So if you have to hop off early, or if some folks I know weren't able to make it, we are able to share that information. In addition to all the information I share tonight, we will also, with the help of Rabbi Cheryl, be sharing some links to some important articles. And at the end of the presentation, at the end of the workshop, we'll be sharing some important links to websites and Twitter feeds that I really encourage you to follow to stay up to date. If you've joined us over the past 14, 15, 16 months, or if you've been in classes with me before, you normally know that my classroom discussions, my teaching, my education is very much open for discussion. But I know a lot of us who are joining tonight, and we won't get through what we need to get through if we do that normal format. If you do have questions tonight, I want to direct you to your toolbar on Zoom. You'll notice that chat is not enabled tonight. That's to kind of keep us focused. And at the same time, this Zoom, while we did have security protocol to get folks in tonight, given the vitriol that's out there, we wanted to make certain we could all focus on here without having to worry about certain comments that might appear in the chat, although I don't think that is going to happen. But our Q&A button is how we're going to be taking questions tonight, and that is being actively monitored. And as we go through tonight, Rabbi Cheryl will stop me as certain questions come in. I am available after this. And if you don't know, probably the best way to reach me is through Ramat Shalom at Ramat Shalom. The email is ramatshalom@ramatshalom.org. So let's jump right in here tonight. I want to say that It is okay to criticize the state of Israel. Just like it's okay for us to criticize the United States, England, Germany, Russia, China, Ethiopia, Saudi Arabia, Syria, you name it. We can all have the right and, quite honestly, the obligation to criticize our own countries and other countries. But when your goal, while often hidden behind flowery language, is the elimination of the state of Israel, you are no longer just criticizing, you are engaging in anti-Semitism. You will see the map in front of you here. We will learn a bit more about it in a bit, but I want to point out how this map completely obliterates the state of Israel. That is a goal of those who chant from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. The river being the Jordan River here to the Mediterranean. They want Israel gone, replaced with Palestine. So I want you to keep that in mind tonight. I also want to direct your attention to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliances, which we call the IHRA, their definition of anti-Semitism, which the IHRA built upon international consensus. It's been embraced by President Biden's administration as an invaluable tool. Last February, after anti-Semitic incidents at Florida State University, President Thrasher, the president of FSU, in addition to condemning the hate directed at Jewish students on campus, said that the United States, the state of Florida, and FSU recognize the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism and its contemporary examples. The IHRA definition of anti-Semitism is becoming more and more accepted as the definition of anti-Semitism across the world. Just today, a few minutes before I hopped online, the state of Texas embraced the definition for the organizations and the institutions that are part of Texas. There are many things that make up this definition. We're not looking at everything. Some of them I think you would find quite obvious. I want to highlight the three that are on the screen right now. And you can also just Google IHRA definition of anti-Semitism and you can find the whole piece. But it is anti-Semitic when you apply double standards to the state of Israel by requiring of it a behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. That idea of double standards, I want you to keep at the front of our thoughts and our discussions and in your mind, not only tonight, but as we move forward. If someone is holding Israel to a different standard than, say, the United States, the IHRA Alliance is saying that it is anti-Semitic. I want to remind everybody, if you are coming in, we are taking questions through the Q&A. So that's the only way we're going to do questions tonight. Second, denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination. This is part of the IHRA Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism. We will talk more about this tonight. And holding Jews collectively responsible for the actions of the state of Israel, as we have seen across the world over the past several days with the rise in anti-Semitism. These are all examples of anti-Semitism. Again, I stress, you can criticize the state of Israel, but if you're going to call out the state of Israel for certain things, you better be calling out other countries for exactly the same thing and doing it in the same type of way. When you deny us our right, as documented in history, as we'll explore, when you rewrite history and remove the Jewish narrative, a narrative that is thousands of years old and is still being told, when you promote lies like the Jews stole Palestine from the Palestinians, and therefore Palestine must be free from the river to the sea, you are denying us our right to self-determination, and you are engaging in anti-Semitism. I want to share with you the words of Congressman Richie Torres of New York. I want to make certain that Cheryl, do you have sound on? I want to make certain that I shared this in a way. I forgot to check if I'm sharing this with sound. So are you able to listen? Just tell me if sound, and if not, I'll adjust. He doesn't talk for a minute.
Early in the week, a public official posted on Twitter the following image of a map where the state of Israel is nowhere to be found. There is nothing accidental.
Hold on, guys. I'm hearing there's a little technical issue, so hang on one sec as I adjust the share here. And we will start that video again. I think that I might have not clicked the proper share option, so hang on one sec. Okay. Are you seeing my screen?
No, I just see you.
Okay, sorry, everybody. Love technology. Will you see me?
I see you.
There we go. I'm sorry about that. Let me just get us all queued up and ready to go. Just a reminder, you can ask questions in the Q&A box if you have them. Yeah, I didn't hit the right button. There we go. 1 second, let me put the congressman back on the screen here.
Early in the week, a public official posted on Twitter the following image of a map where the state of Israel is nowhere to be found. There is nothing accidental about the omission. Wiping Israel off the map is the objective of the BDS movement. Notice the image includes flowers to symbolize peace, as though peace meant the destruction of Israel itself. When most Americans speak of peace, we mean the peaceful coexistence of an Israeli state and a Palestinian state, not the existence of one to the exclusion of the other. Most Americans are anguished by the trauma of Israelis seeking refuge in bomb shelters in the face of relentless rocket fire. And most Americans are anguished by the deep suffering and death toll of Palestinians who live under the repressive rule of Hamas and who have fallen victim to the wretchedness of war. The rapid-fire rhetoric that we have seen directed at Israel is so hyperbolic, so vitriolic, that it inflames rather than informs. It delegitimizes Israel rather than de-escalates the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Those propagating hate are not part of the solution, but part of the problem. Hate never brings peace. It never has, it never will. You can either promote hate or you can promote peace, but you cannot advance both. Let us not be fooled by the pretense of peace. Let us find the wisdom to tell the difference between genuine peace and hate hidden under the guise of peace. I yield back.
So I did see a question, someone asking if we can hold Israel to Jewish standards. I think as Jews, our morality, our values lie at the foundation of even our own country's values and morals. And we as Jews certainly have the right to hold our own country and the state of Israel to those values, because I think that, again, they form the foundation. The danger, however, is that Israel is a nation, and she has to be held to the same laws that, say, Jordan is, the same values that Egypt is. And I wouldn't expect Egypt and Jordan to be expected to live up to quote unquote Jewish values. And we have to make certain that the world makes certain that Judaism, that Israel is held to the same standards as every other nation. So it's a complicated question with a complicated answer, but I think we have to be very careful when it comes to holding Israel to any different standards when it comes to the global stage. I want to take us through some of the history of Israel. And again, this could be a semester-long course, and you'll see I've listed some facts here, and I've also listed at the bottom of the page here, and maybe Cheryl, you can put that link in the chat if you want to go back and view some of these maps and other maps, just to see the history of the Jewish people and how the fact is that Jews are indigenous to the land of Israel. Jews are indigenous to the land of Israel. Don't let anybody tell you differently. And if they do, make sure you correct them. Our history to the land of Israel is thousands of years old. I'm not really going to go into biblical history because those two words, Bible and history, are often difficult to bring together. But the fact is we know at least the time period associated with Abraham and Sarah in what we call the Torah. And I know we have many friends from other faiths joining us tonight. In the Bible, Abraham and Sarah dates back to 200 BCE. BCE outside of the Jewish world is often referred to as BC. We refer to it as BCE, before the Common Era. So 2,000 years before the year zero, about 4,000 years ago is when we can date Abraham and Sarah, but a little bit more historically and grounded in archaeological research and work that still goes on in the state of Israel is this first map that you can see here from 1200 BCE. I know it's a little hard to see all the details, so I encourage you to go to the link. This is the map of the 12 tribes of Israel, approximately where they called home, where they established themselves. You will see on these maps also the black line indicating the boundaries of the modern state of Israel. So you'll see that the 12 tribes expanded through the mid and central regions of the country and went all the way north into what is now the Kingdom of Jordan. You might wonder why this area down here is a little empty. Those of you who have traveled to Israel, this is the Negev Desert. Not the easiest place to build a home, although Jews have done a pretty amazing job with it in modern times. But to see it empty, you might wonder, well, that seems like prime real estate. It was a little challenging. If we jump ahead to the year 1000, that's when scholars usually date the King David and following his King Solomon. And the kingdoms of David and Solomon, ranging from 1004 to 968, again, BCE, you can see was quite extensive, including most of the modern state of Israel, into Jordan, stretching up a little bit into Lebanon and Syria. It was quite an immense nation and region. And then you will see a little blank space here between 968 and 37. You have to realize that as a people, we were often conquered and then exiled. There was a period of exile that went on, and we eventually made it back into the land and would rebuild the land. And we see here from 37 BCE to 73 CE, so after the Common Era, after the year zero. This blue region is the Roman-controlled region of what was the Jewish state, the Jewish state during the Herodian period under Herod. The key again is, and we can talk for hours about all the historical details, that you can see and just get a sense of how this homeland has for centuries been part of our people's lives, and our roots go back thousands and thousands of years. In 70 CE, so around this time period, we were exiled by the Romans. The Romans came in, the temple was destroyed, the Jews lasted, or the majority of the Jews lasted for a little bit, and then we were exiled out of the region. That being said, we never fully left. There was always a Jewish population in the land of Israel when we talk about a period of exile, especially after the Roman exile. Jews remained in their homeland. The Jewish people has had a continuous presence in the land of Israel, again, for 4,000 years. And those little dots on the screen show you from 73 to 636, the little towns and villages that were populated by Jews. Again, I encourage you to go to the link if you would like to see some more detail on those links. It's a little hard to see it close up unless you have much better eyes than I do. On the map on the far right is the reign of we have to keep in mind that Israel was ruled by the Romans for a while. Israel was ruled by the Byzantine Empire for a while. Israel was under Arab control for a while from 636 to 1099. Israel was under Christian control with the Crusaders from 1099 to 1291. Mamluk rule, which was a non-Arab, ethnically diverse group of people, mostly Turks, Caucasians, Eastern and Southern European. They ruled over the region. And then from 1517 to 1917, the Ottoman Turks ruled over Israel. And these are just another example from 636 to 1880. While there were less Jewish towns, as more people had perhaps either consolidated where they were living or moved outside, there remained a Jewish presence. You might know some folks who have relatives who descend from these families that have always been a part of Israel. The Ottoman Empire is going to be key in our discussion here. The Ottoman Empire, again, ruled over what we know as the modern state of Israel from 1517 to 1917. And with World War I, with revolts from Arabs living in the land, there was an Arab nationalism that developed. Arabs within the Ottoman Empire, while they were loyal to the empire, really wanted to create another Arab state, a distinct Arab state. And the British, as World War I was happening, were poking around and invading in this region. And this actually led to the demise of Ottoman rule after 400 years. What you see in front of you is the Sykes-Picot Agreement from 1916, right before World War I ended. The UK and the French took it upon themselves to divide up the area and begin a process that unfortunately I think we're still all paying the price for, of international powers kind of coming in and chopping things up. The blue on the map was what the British proposed. They wanted to control. The different shades of pink are what the French wanted to control. Again, these black lines are Israel, so this would be Lebanon and Syria. Jordan here. The yellow is kind of an international area. This agreement was only partially implemented, so it never really came into place. But I want you to see some of the international line drawing that was randomly going on behind the scenes. Now, a lot of folks, you will hear this a lot these days, will accuse Israel of colonialization. And we're going to discuss this in a bit, but right now, I want you to watch as we look at some of the maps and see how European nations made promises to Jews, made promises to Arabs, reneged on these promises, took away land, went behind the Arabs at times, went behind the Jews at times, giving into pressure from other groups. All the while, this was kind of, I think, pre-Sharpies, although I don't know the history, all the while using the pre-Sharpies to draw lines and boundaries that carved up the Middle East. I want us to also point out that the Paris Peace Conference of January 1919, which led to the League of Nations, this was all around the ending of World War I, and the San Remo Conference of April 1920 allocated, so keep in mind, this Sykes-Picot Agreement never came into existence. But as a result of the war ending and the League of Nations, they allocated the whole land of what we now call Israel, including what would become most of the country of Jordan, what was called the Transjordan, and parts of Iraq, to Britain as a direct mandate, what would be called the Mandate of Palestine. And we'll talk about that name in a little bit. Syria and regions up north here in Lebanon, this would be given to the French. So this region down here after World War I was all taken over by the British. We're not going to pay too much attention to the French now. We're going to focus on the British. In front of us here, as we look at this British mandate, I want to make certain that everybody has a clear understanding of what Zionism is, because it's another term that's thrown out there willy-nilly. Zionism is the national movement for the return of the Jewish people to their homeland. And we've seen in the maps that Israel is indeed our homeland and has been for centuries. And the resumption of Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel. Zion, Z-I-O-N, is synonymous in the Bible with the land, with Jerusalem, and with the Jewish people's home. Zionism really began to take hold in the 19th century as we as a people began to think deeply about how to thrive as a minority group. And there began to be a desire to return home. It was a nationalism. I mentioned that even in the Arab world, there was nationalism. The Jews, especially Jews in Europe at that time, really Jews everywhere, as if it's any different than it was today, were experiencing terrible anti-Semitism. You're familiar with the stereotypical Fiddler on the Roof. Pogroms were a huge part of Jewish life. Many of you are familiar with the Dreyfus Affair. There was an ugly, ugly, ugly anti-Semitism that was spreading in the world in the 19th century, early 20th century. People like Theodore Herzl and other key leaders would really give birth to the modern Zionist movement. And say that, we need to take care of ourselves and we need to advocate for a safe haven, a place where our culture can thrive, a place where Judaism can thrive in the land that was ours, in the land of Israel, where many of our family still lives. And so with the creation or the official creation of Zionism, more Jews would slowly do what we call make aliyah. Make aliyah is the Jewish term for immigrate to the land of Israel. the first there was the first official aliyah in 1882, although Jews were, again, Jews were there. Jews were constantly living there. It tended to be religious Jews prior to the first aliyah in 1882 who moved to Israel. But in 1882, several thousand Russian Jews emigrated to Palestine because of the violence that they were experiencing. Prior to this, again, most of the people who were going for religious reasons. Now they were going for safety reasons. And in 1882, about 35,000 Jews from the Russian area in general moved to Israel and called Israel home. The second aliyah, the second big wave of immigration of Jews began in 1904. Again, spurred on by Russian anti-Semitism. About 40,000 Jews would make it. Only half of them would stay because of challenges they faced in the land, the ability to survive, violence that they faced in the land, and then something really, really important. Many of us are familiar with the Jewish National Fund. If you're not, if you've ever planted a tree in Israel, or if you ever had one of those metal boxes, if you're Jewish and you used to put money in it to plant trees in Israel, that's brought to you by the Jewish National Fund. And we all think of Jewish National Fund as kind of one of the environmental groups planting trees in Israel. But the Jewish National Fund was created to legally buy real estate in what would become the land of Israel to create a future Jewish home. And in 1903, JNF acquired its first parcel of land, and there would be many more after it, in about 800 acres north of Tel Aviv in the city of Hadera. Again, I want you to understand that Jews were legally buying land. Now, at this same time, with their Arab neighbors, the Arab community had their own nationalism, and one of the leaders of the nationalist movement was Faisal ibn al-Hussein, one of the leading Arab nationalists, and would become a leader in the Arab world. He saw the Zionist movement as a great thing. I want to stress that. These are his own words, okay? This is the Arab nationalist speaking in the early 1900s. We Arabs, especially the educated among us, look with deepest sympathy on the Zionist movement. We will wish the Jews a hearty welcome home. We are working together for a reformed and revised Near East, and our two movements complete one another. The Jewish movement is nationalist and not imperialist, and there is room for both of us. Indeed, I think that neither can be a real success without the other. Boy, have things changed. And what caused the problem? The problem was Jews came to Israel. Lots of Jews came to Israel. And in the Arab world, too many Jews came to Israel. Before we go back to the map, I want to just hit a little bit more on what we've talked about here. This idea that Zionism is colonialism, is imperialism. That is a flat out lie. Okay? Zionism is not colonialism. Zionism is not imperialism. Colonialism and imperialism means, in part, living by exploiting others, whereas the Zionists strived to become, I mean, they were farmers and laborers, and they lived by their own hand, by their own work. Zionism is the national liberation movement of the Jewish people, which holds the Jews, like any other nation, like the Arabs, are entitled to a homeland. And history has demonstrated time and time again the need to ensure that Jewish security through a national homeland is essential. The Zionist idea is also referred to as racist and is associated these days with white supremacy. If you're surprised by that, I really don't want you to dig and find it, but it's not hard to find. It's all over social media and in the print these days. But there's so much to unpack as far as lies when somebody says that Zionism, the Zionist movement, and Israel is a racist country and a white supremacist power suppressing Arabs, creating an apartheid state. There's only about 30% of Israeli Jews who are Ashkenazi. 30% of Israeli Jews. And why is that important? Because Ashkenazi Jews are descendants of European Jews, and they tend to be, although some argue about this, they tend to be more associated with what we would call Caucasians or white people. The majority of Israelis today, 70% of them, are Mizrahi, Middle Eastern or North African, not white. And many of them are native to the land or living in Israel because they were exiled, and we'll talk about this, from Arab lands themselves. I'm going to ask if Cheryl can post the article by my friend Chen Mazi. What's that? All right, thank you. I really encourage you to read that article. He himself, he was at Ramat Shalom before COVID. He's a Mizrahi Jew, and this is one of his passions to talk about the fact that Israel, if you think of Israel as a white nation, you are wrong. And he is a Mizrahi Jew, and he takes personal offense at that label. We're going to talk more about this as we go on. It's a loaded topic, but I kind of want to get back on track here to what this map shows here. So again, this is the mandate. And the British foreign minister in 1917 was Foreign Minister Balfour, and he pledged his support for the establishment of a Jewish national home in Palestine. These are his words. His Majesty's governments view with favor the establishment of Palestine, of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any country. The Balfour Declaration's promise of a homeland for the Jews was later accepted internationally and incorporated into various resolutions. But this map that you're seeing in front of you was never offered to the Jewish people, okay? But it did, again, help to set the borders and the boundaries. It also did, when the Jews of the world heard about the Balfour Declaration and the pogroms in Russia were continuing, the third Aliyah took place in 1919, just meaning there was a third major influx of Jews. 40,000 Jews moved to Israel with the hope that this region would become a safe haven for them. And in 1924, between 1924 and 1928, the hate expanded beyond Russia and went into Poland. And there were also restrictions in our own country, in the United States at that time. 82,000 Jews moved to Palestine. And we'll talk about how could I use the word Palestine. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Now, of those 82,000 Jews, it was just too difficult. 23,000 of them would leave. The next major influx, and I'm sure you'll know why when I tell you the dates, 1933 to 1935, 174,000 Jews from Europe made Aliyah to Israel because a man by the name of Adolf Hitler was coming into power. I just want to pause for a second, Cheryl. Are there any questions? Because we're flying through history. Yes.
Do you have access to the Q&A?
Yes, I do. All right. Where am I? Going down. All right. Is it the most recent one? Oh, I'm sorry, the open question. How can we have effective conversations about what is going on in Israel while educating people about the anti-Semitic roots of some of the most We're going to talk about that, Andrew. It's a great question. Hold me to it. I hope that towards the end, we're going to talk about some of that. My very compartmentalized mind just needs to get through some of that stuff. We're going to talk about some of the stuff that's out there that's making it difficult to have some of these discussions, but we will get to that. This is going to be a powerful thing and troubling thing for some of you. There has never been an Arab or Muslim nation of Palestine. I'm going to repeat it because it's fact and it's true, and I'm not saying this to be outlandish or be insulting. There has never been an Arab or Muslim nation of Palestine. You know that I need to put that clarification in there because Arabs can be Christian and Muslim. Some people think that, you know, my friend Chen Mazi gets very mad when people call him an Arab Jew. An Arab Jew is a Mizrahi. They have their own name. There was a British mandate of Palestine, which officially came into being when remember, this was all the mandate of Palestine. It eventually was divided. The blue would be called Palestine by the British, and the pink would be called Transjordan. What happens here? Well, the fact is, the Arabs got angry. They didn't like that the Jews were going to get this whole region. And so there was a lot of behind the scenes work. And so the British did what they continue to do, and they took this section and they gave it to the Arab world. You might argue here that this was a two-state solution, although there was no attempt at this point to make these independent regions. This was controlled by Britain. Let's talk for a minute about this word Palestine. It was chosen by the British to become the name of the mandate based on the term Palestina. So Palestine without an E but an A, which was given to the region by the Roman Empire in the 2nd century. Now, Palestina was historians, scholars, archaeologists, etc., acknowledge was connected to a biblical people, a people mentioned in Torah and the Bible called the Palishtim. Palishtim. They lived, hope you can see my pointer, for the most part around here on the coast of what we call Israel. They were not Arab, they were not Muslim, they were not Jewish, they were sea people, they were Greek in origin, and they found their way here along the coastline, and they are mentioned. They didn't have tons of land. I actually, when I did some of my first archaeological work in Israel, I was digging in that region. My late teacher, archaeologist Trudy Dotan, did a lot of research on them. Again, they were Greek. Now the custom is when a nation would invade another nation, they would often name the nation after the first region in which they entered. So as the Romans swept in and they came through here, they entered the region of the Plishtim, which then became Palestina, okay? So that is the origin of that word. And yes, the British used that word to name the mandate, but you gotta realize, and some of you actually know this, originally the Jerusalem Post, a great newspaper that I encourage you to read, an Israeli newspaper. Prior to the establishment of the state of Israel, you know what it was called? The Palestine Post. It was a Jewish paper. Some of you have relatives who were born in the land of Israel prior to the establishment of the modern state of Israel. They have Palestinian passports, okay? Jews were living in what was Palestine, this British mandate named after the Roman region, named after the Greek sea people. The territory of the British mandate included land on a little bit of, so you can see how it was divided up. Now, one thing that you have to keep in mind, the pink area, if you were Jewish, you were not allowed to live there. We're going to talk a lot about Palestinians being kicked out of regions. No Jews were allowed in the Transjordan. Off limits, goodbye. That was not the case in the British Mandate of Palestine. The Arabs didn't want the Jews in the region. Okay, that's very, very, very important for us to keep in mind and to think about. The Arab world just didn't want, remember, originally they loved the idea of Jewish nationalism, but it became a little bit too much for them. And the Arab world did not want the Jews to have a homeland. So in an attempt to get them to back down, to get us to back down the Jewish people, the British continued to take land away from the Jews. Now, there was lots of tension, lots of violence, unfortunately, coming from both sides that was taking place during the time period as Zionism grew, as Arab nationalism grew. And the European powers did what they did. They continued to meddle and take their markers and hack things up. And in 1937, think about what's going on in the world at that point for the Jewish world. The European powers came up with a great idea. The Peel, I'm being sarcastic, the Peel Commission Plan. And this was really in response to a big Arab revolt against the British Mandate of Palestine, which, remember, this was all blue before. It's not blue anymore. They decided to appease the Arabs. They're going to divide up the British Mandate and give the Jews this little section up here, create an international region between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, and the rest of the region would be given to the Arabs. The Arabs rejected the plan because it would have forced them. By accepting it, they would have had to accept the creation of a Jewish state. And at that point, remember, there were Arabs living up here. That would mean that those living in that region, Arabs would have to live under Jewish control. Not to mention there were Jews living down here, but the Jews didn't complain about that. The Zionists, the Jews, they accepted it, but they fought it a little bit because they felt that they were being confined to little more than a ghetto of 5,000 out of 26,700 square kilometers remaining in Palestine. But the Jews were so eager to get this, they accepted this offer. This blue could have been the land of Israel. But in 1938, with the Arabs refusing to take it, the British realized that it just wouldn't happen. Again, in 1939, there was what we call a British white paper, an official British document that called for the establishment of an Arab state in Palestine within 10 years, and for limiting Jewish immigration to no more than 75,000 over the following 5 years. After that time period, no one would be allowed in without the consent of the Arab population. So the British white paper was giving total control of Jewish immigration to the Arab world. Though the Arabs had been given all of this power and granted concessions on Jewish immigration, they turned it down. Okay? Theme over and over again. And why did they turn it down? Because they did not want the Jews living there. After World War II ended and the magnitude of the Holocaust became known, this accelerated the demands, not just among the Jewish world, but the global world, for some type of resolution on the question of Palestine becoming a home for the survivors of Hitler's final solution. The world started to see the Jews as the oppressed. There's a narrative that is out there in the world, in our own country and elsewhere. The world feels for the oppressed. Nowadays, Israel is no longer seen as the oppressed. Israel is seen as the oppressor. But back then, it took the massacre of 6 million Jews for us to be seen as the oppressed. And the world responded. In 1947, the Jewish world completely decimated. The United Nations, who today slapped Israel in the face, and we'll talk about this in such a horrific way, But in 1947, the United Nations offered a two-state solution. You'll see this is different than the other two-state solutions that have been offered. The blue would become Israel, the pink would become Palestine. And I'm using that word now because this was to become the Arab nation. And a lot of the region in here is up for negotiation to become a state of Palestine. The yellow, which includes Jerusalem, was to be international. The Jews accepted it. The Arabs once again refused it. On November 29, 1947, the UN General Assembly voted on this petition plan, adopted it. And as the British mandate ended on May 14th, 1948, Britain said, we're leaving. Here's your two states. The War of Independence began because the Arabs wouldn't take it and they attacked Israel. I just want to pause. Any questions? Nope, we're doing okay. Hope I'm not put, oh, there's a question.
Who on behalf of the Arabs refused it?
So, okay, this is a good question. And that kind of has to do with where we're going to go right now, Beth Ann. So if you look at the map on the left, again, it's a little hard to see. The Arab world was made up of various different powers, a lot of them still the same powers as today. So who refused it? Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq, and local Arab militia forces that had developed as part of the nationalist cause. They were all united in the same way as they condemned Israel, and we'll talk about it again, some of you might not know, they condemned Israel today. It was a united Arab front. They all turned it down. There was not one Arab nation that said, yeah, let's give the Jews what they need. And all of these nations, and you can see their flags here, decided that when the British pulled out, it was time to once and for all take things into their own hands and drive the Jews from the river into the sea. And that is indeed what they tried to do. And you can see how they entered the country, and the map on the right shows you the result. The fact that this happened is quite miraculous. I want to talk about facts. I don't want to talk about miracles. But Israel really held her own for the most part. The area right here, what we now know of as Gaza, the hot spot over the past month, was taken over by Egypt. And this area in the Jewish world known as Judea and Samaria, in the international world referred to as the West Bank of the Jordan River, Jordan pushed her way in and took control of this area. The armistice lines, the peace lines of 1949, you can see this map actually makes them green. You will often hear folks refer to the green line in Israel. This was the line that was agreed upon by Jordan, Israel, and Egypt. Egypt and Jordan took over what was to be the majority of the land of Palestine. In this 1949 green line, we need to address the fact that the city of Jerusalem, right here, was cut in half. The Jews got the western part, the Jordanians got the eastern part, including the old city. All Jews were expelled by the Jordanian powers, and Jews were no longer allowed to go to the Western Wall, the holiest site in Jerusalem. It was forbidden, it was illegal, it simply was not possible. I have to point out that while Israel has lots of flaws and imperfections, just like the United States, just like Jordan, just like Egypt, just like the Palestinian Authority. When Israel, and we'll talk in a few moments about the 67 war, when Israel regained control of Jerusalem, she did not kick out the Muslims from their third holiest site or any Muslim sites. Israel allows access to anyone to any of their holy sites. The only place they really limit things, and this is a hot topic, but Jews are really not allowed on the Temple Mount at all times, the Temple Mount being the Al-Aqsa Mosque, where our temple once stood on top of the Western Wall. Jews can go on. I have been on before. It's a hot spot. The Arabs get very mad when we're on there. But I want to point out that Arabs can come to the Western Wall. Most of them don't go, but Israel does not limit that. Israel is in charge of the security at the holy sites after the '67 war because it is an Israeli territory. But the Muslim religious institution is in charge of the upkeep and all other aspects of their holy sites, including the Al-Aqsa Mosque, where there were the riots just a couple of weeks ago, which some say triggered the rockets from Hamas, which is just an excuse. There were indeed riots on the Temple Mount. And I do want to just share with you an image taken the morning before those riots. These are Palestinian worshipers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That's that gold dome in Jerusalem. I want to point out what you see here, these green flags that they are flying, okay? Those are Hamas's flags. That's not some peace-loving Palestinian flag. That's not Fatah, the other party that makes up Palestinian leadership. That's Hamas leadership waving their flags. And in a second, we're going to look at what Hamas is, but Hamas is a terrorist organization. We will look at their goals. They hate Israel. They hate Jews. They threaten the press. You know, there's the stereotype out there that Jews control the press. Cheryl's probably posted in the chat an article by Matthew Friedman from The Atlantic, which I really encourage you to read. It goes back to the war in 2014, which talks about the fact that Hamas does things like host their offices in AP buildings, like the Associated Press buildings, like we just witnessed in Gaza, and threatens the press if they don't do exactly what they say to do. Please read in the article and do your own research on that, but I think it's incredibly important for us to keep that in mind. Hamas has done an incredible, I don't know if my friend Angela Ribler is on, but we were talking last night. Hamas has done an incredible job with their PR and their marketing, and Israel has done a horrific job at it, but they have played off the genuine concerns in our own country about law enforcement and violence. But here we're talking about US citizens, individuals finding themselves in terrible situations with law enforcement. And in Israel, we're talking about a documented terrorist organization pulling the strings and stoking violence against innocent Israelis. And I do feel it's important to point out this tweet from just a few days ago. Black Lives Matter has officially come out in solidarity with Palestinians. We are a movement committed to ending settler colonialism. We talked about that, how that terminology is just wrong in all forms, and we'll continue to advocate for Palestinian liberation, always have and always will. Free Palestine. I'm going to let that be and allow that to sink in. You can see the tweet from May 17th on the Black Lives Matter official movement. I know many of you texted that to me and were surprised. This is not a surprise to me. Black Lives Matter has for many years been the pro-Palestinian side. Now, you can be pro-Palestinian, but when you promote information calling Israel, you know, a colonial power, you got to be very careful with what your language is. And when you're writing in the midst of violence against Israelis, you're sending a very dangerous message. We hear a lot about the fact that with the creation of the state of Israel, Palestinians were displaced. But what we don't hear about is all of the Jews who were displaced. And the fact is, more than 130,000 Jews were expelled or killed from their homes during the 1948 War of Independence. You can see it in the New York Times, shockingly, which is not very Israel-friendly these days, below you. You can see to the left, again, it's hard to see, but if you visit that earlier link, those are the towns in Gaza and in the West Bank where Jews were exiled and or killed by Palestinian or Jordanian and Egyptian powers that worked their way into that land. They technically were ethnically cleansed out of that region, but their memory is documented by those dots. We're going to talk about the map below, but I would be remiss, again, there's a lot that we're trying to cover right now, but included in the War of Independence, an area that was lost to the Jewish, lost by the Jews, was an area called Sheikh Jarrah. And if you've been following anything going on in the Middle East right now, in Israel, Sheikh Jarrah is again, in addition to the temple riots, what Hamas is using to say the reason that they attacked Israel. And to teach us a little bit of that, I want to share the words of Emily Schrader, who I encourage you to follow on Twitter. She's a columnist for the Jerusalem Post, and she's going to teach us just a short little clip here about this area and why it is not as clear-cut as the press is putting out there, that Israel is stealing land from Palestinians.
What's really happening at Sheikh Jarrah? In 1875, a Jewish rabbi purchased this empty property in Sheikh Jarrah and has maintained ownership of it ever since. When the Jordanians illegally occupied Jerusalem in 1948 and ethnically cleansed it of Jews, including destroying synagogues, they built 28 homes for Palestinians who currently live there today. In 1967, the property was annexed to Israel after the Six-Day War. All this while Jews still owned this property. Years later, a Jewish organization purchased the property and appealed to the Israeli courts, who requested both sides, the Palestinians and the Israelis, come to an agreement in which the Palestinians would pay rent as tenants. They tried to fight the case in court, but lost, and are now facing eviction after not paying rent for years. Here's what you need to know. This is an ongoing and complicated legal case, and both sides have a legitimate claim. But the Palestinians could remain in their homes if they agreed to pay rent. They refused. Why? Propaganda. They are using this case to make a production to incite violence against Israel, even though the facts of the case prove something else entirely. If the same situation occurred anywhere else, the reactions wouldn't be the same. Tenants who don't pay rent get evicted, and nobody uses it as an excuse to launch terror attacks. The U.S. members of Congress who are condemning Israel over this issue are fanning the flames of anti-Semitism at a time when we have a rise in anti-Semitism in the United States, and we're dealing with violence against Jews in Israel. To the elected officials commenting, you're being duped. Attacking Israel over Sheikh Jarrah isn't fighting for justice, it's irresponsibility. As an American Israeli, I'm begging you, stop fueling anti-Semitism.
So I want to point out too that there's some great articles I meant to put in the link. If you want them, please let me know, where the Palestinians who are living in the homes in Sheikh Jarrah they wanted to pay the rent, but they were approached by Palestinian leadership and threatened with harm if they would do so, for reasons that we've said many times. If you pay a Jew to live on their land, you are validating the Jews' right to own the land, and that goes against the everything that they believe in. You don't want to give the Jews any bit of right to the land. I went back here because I just wanted to point out on the slide below that during that Jews in all of the Arab nations that attacked Israel, including many others, 856,000 of them approximately. You see that number is a little bit different than the 830. There are different numbers out there. They were exiled. They were kicked out of the land, including my friend Chen Mazig. His family had to leave their country. Jews in Arab lands were kicked out. Now, I do not want to overlook the fact, because I hear some of you frustrated at me. During the War of Independence, a slightly smaller amount, but still significant amount of of Palestinian Arabs, 750,000 of them, had to flee their homes in the newly created state of Israel for many factors. Some of it was, yes, there was violence by Jewish extremists directed at some of them, but others simply did not want to live under Jewish control. So they fled. A lot of them fled to Gaza. A lot of them fled to the West Bank, or they fled to other areas. I think it's important to note that the other Arab nations, mainly Egypt and Jordan and some of the others right around, they refused to take these Palestinians into their societies, and they settled them in refugee camps, insisting that citizens and integration, making them citizens, would undermine their right to return once they finally kicked out the Jews, because they thought that that was going to happen. Now, during the 67 war, which we'll look at in a second, 250,000 Palestinians, again, then had to flee the West Bank or Gaza for their own safety, or because they didn't want to live under control. They were part of this war. Now, the wars were not brought on by Israel, remember. Israel was defending herself from Arab attack. Had the Arabs left it, there wouldn't have been any of this issue. But we cannot ignore the 830, 850, whatever it is, Jews who were displaced, if we're gonna talk about the displaced Palestinians. Because if we don't talk about the displaced Jews, then we're creating a double standard. And as the IHRA talks about, that creates an anti-Semitic situation. Hold on, there we go. I want to point out, and this headline is from March 2021, the expulsion of Jews in Arab lands continues to this day. This was March 30th. 13 Yemeni Jews, the headline says, leaves, my thing is blocking it. What does that say? Can you see what my headline says? I can't read it. Thank you. Yemeni Jews reach an exit agreement with the Iran-backed Houthi militias, which rule parts of Yemen. They didn't reach any type of exit agreement. They were told, you're getting out of Yemen. There were just a handful of Yemeni Jews. God bless them for living there. They were kicked out. There's a lot of issue right now with a lot of Yemeni Jewish real estate, ritual objects, that are in the hands of these governments, and many of us are advocating for them to be saved and or returned or brought to Jewish museums. But it's a huge issue, one that does not get a global spotlight, but one we as Jews and or pro-Israel allies need to pay close attention to. I want to try to get through the 67 war here, which is really important. Again, this goes back to the question that Beth Ann asked. These are the same countries that attacked before. The 1967 war was the result of a preemptive strike by Israel in response to another Arab attempt. All of the same nations, Iran, Egypt, Iraq, not Iran, sorry, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Syria, you name it. Israel had to defend herself from this, and her preemptive strike and defensive move greatly expanded the boundaries of the Jewish state, okay? You will see we took total control of Judea and Samaria, or what we call the West Bank. We took control of Gaza. We took control of the region many of us are familiar with, the Golan Heights, and the entire Sinai Peninsula. Many of you know these are not the boundaries of the state of Israel, but at this point, Jews regained access to the Western Wall. Muslims remained capable of going to the Western Wall, and we're skipping lots of information. I'm skipping the Yom Kippur War. I'm skipping a lot of that stuff, but I just want you to see, because what we need to look at as we look at this map here on the right is how Israel went from this state to the state that she looks like today with the boundaries today? Question? No? When the 67 war was completed, the United Nations created Resolution 242. And I know that this is a lot of international law and stuff like that, but it's really important to understand UN Resolution 242 in context with the discussions today about territories and boundaries and refugees. UN Resolution 242, which is still binding, requires Palestine to acknowledge Israel's right to exist, all the Arab nations to acknowledge Israel's right to exist, and for Israel to return some, but not all territories. And below are some of the highlights from the text that I think are important. The resolution calls for a just and lasting peace in which every state in the area can live in security. This has not happened. Israel faces constant attacks from her neighbors. Withdrawal of Israeli armed forces from territories occupied in the recent conflict, meaning in the 67 war. There is a lot written by legal experts who were part of this process and legal experts today. You got to pay attention. We've got lawyers in the room to the language here. Withdrawal of Israeli forces from territories, not all territories. There was an acknowledgement that the boundaries that Israel had pre-67 were not boundaries that would allow for a safe and secure Israel. So Israel has a responsibility, along with her partners, to enter into negotiations to figure out what territories will be kept and what territories will not be kept. UN Resolution 242 does not in any way require Israel to give back every bit of her land. Termination of all claims or states of belligerency and respect for and acknowledgement of the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence of every state in the area and their right to live in peace within secure and recognized boundaries free from threats or acts of force. You ask yourself, has that been fulfilled? This other one, a just settlement for the refugee problem. UN Resolution 242 acknowledged that there were 830 to 850,000 Jewish refugees in addition to the 750,000 Palestinian refugees at that point. There needed to be some type of resolution. There has not been resolution really for either side on this. The world focuses on the Palestinians, but not the Jews. And a need to promote agreement and assist efforts to achieve a peaceful and accepted settlement. That means the world has to help bring about a settlement. Well, the fact is, and some of us were alive to experience this. Unfortunately, Sadat did not live, the Egyptian president did not live much longer from this because he was killed partially in result of this. But Israel and Egypt signed a peace treaty on March 26, 1979 with Prime Minister Begin and President Carter and President Sadat. And you can see the map on the lower left. Don't worry so much about it, the details, but part of that peace treaty was for Israel to begin moving out of the Sinai Peninsula, and she did so in stages. What Egypt gave up, Egypt said to Israel, listen, we're giving you control of this tiny little strip of land right here, Gaza. This is where Hamas is today, guys. We're giving you Gaza. There's the beginning of some Palestinian leaders there, work with them, this emerging leadership. But ultimately, the burden fell on Israel. And the fact is who does Israel negotiate with to give Gaza back? Because Gaza was Egyptian, but Egyptians said they don't want it. Plus, I want you to look at the article right below the three leaders coming from last February. Egypt begins building concrete wall along Gaza border. This is actually a second wall. There is quite a fortified border security fence separating Gaza from Egypt, separating the Palestinians from their brother and sister Arab lands. Some of you know that there is a security wall in Israel. We're not going to focus on that too much now, but the fact is that security wall does get a lot of international attention. It was created after countless terrorist attacks, which took the lives of two of our friends. Cheryl and I had two friends who were killed in a bus bombing from people who were able to walk literally across the West Bank boundary, and the security wall runs along the West Bank. Yes, it is, there's a lot of issues with it. It has caused issues in the Palestinian community, but it has reduced terrorist attacks by, I think, almost 90%. So Israel has this fine line of balancing security and the welfare of Palestinians. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But I do want to point out that the border that exists between Gaza and Egypt, a border that Hamas calls the wall of death, saying it threatens Palestinians, doesn't get international attention. This article, by the way, this Egypt begins building a concrete wall, that was from the Jewish press. They highlight it. August 17, 2005, it was a big argument between my wife and me because it was when Ariel Sharon decided that he was going to pull out Israeli forces from Gaza to give Gaza to the emerging Palestinian Authority, okay? The PA, that's the group, the governmental group of what will eventually become the nation of Palestine. So there was leadership. That leadership wanted free land. They want land in Gaza. They want land in the West Bank. And so Israel, after a lot of talk and negotiation, said, we're going to give it back. I was in total favor of it. Cheryl was very worried about it. We had some good arguments about it. When Israel pulled out, Gaza was ethnically cleansed of Jews. No Jews were allowed to live in the land. 1,700 Jewish families were uprooted. They couldn't stay there. And to this day, no Jews have been present in the Gaza Strip. And one of the first things that the Palestinians did when they took control of that region was to take dump trucks and bulldozers and raze the synagogues and any other holy sites that were left of the Jews. Some people accuse Israel of turning Gaza into a large outdoor prison for Palestinians, but they don't talk about the fact that Jews were kicked out. They don't talk about the fact that Egypt has built a security wall. They don't talk about the fact that this is an entry point for Iran to ship in all the missiles. Where do you think Hamas gets its missiles and money and all of that to do what it does in Gaza? So yeah, there's security around it, but there is there's also a Palestinian Authority ruling Gaza that wanted their own land, and they are ultimately responsible for the well-being of the Palestinian people here. If you want a nation, you have to be able to rule your nation. We're going to talk about the aid that Israel sends in there in a little bit. Any questions? No, I'm doing okay. All right. We need to talk about Hamas, because some people say, well, you know, Hamas is just a terrorist group. They are not a government. But the fact is Hamas is the ruling authority in Gaza. You think talking about Israeli politics is confusing. I think Palestinian politics is even more confusing. They have a president and they have a parliament. The president of the Palestinian Authority is based in the West Bank. His name is Mahmoud Abbas. He is part of the Fatah party, F-A-T-A-H. Hamas has the majority of seats in the parliament and really is in control of Gaza. In 2006, Hamas won the Palestinian parliamentary election, not the presidential election. Abbas did. And there is a terrible, terrible, terrible divide between the Fatah party and Hamas. You think the divide between Democrats and Republicans is bad? You don't know nothing then, because it's really bad. So bad that there is fighting, we don't hear about this, but fighting on the Temple Mount as we speak between Fatah forces and Hamas forces. Just, I think last week, protesters kicked the Mufti of Jerusalem, who, you know, is the one of the head leaders, but he's affiliated with the Fatah party. They kicked him. They tried to kick him out of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, that one with the gold dome. We don't hear about that. Hamas is, Abbas has tried to limit elections. Hamas is hungry for power. Hamas was feeling that they're irrelevant. So yes, the Sheikh Jarrah incident that we've talked about is important. It's a Supreme Court case. It's emotional. The riots at the temple, while we only hear one side, are important. The fact is Hamas wanted attention. Hamas wanted attention, and boy, oh boy, did she get that attention. What you need to understand about Hamas, now I don't think we're going to look at all of this, but Hamas has a charter, and Cheryl can post the charter in the chat room and you can go read it. What's that? Thank you. Just a couple highlights here. Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it obliterated others before it. Hamas has a goal, and that is the obliteration of the state of Israel. They don't hide it. It's not a secret. Nobody should be surprised. So when you look at Resolution 242 and you realize that the leaders in Gaza are refusing to acknowledge Israel even having a right to exist, how is Israel supposed to negotiate a peace with people like that? I also want to point out Article 7 at the bottom. The Prophet Allah, bless him and grant him salvation, has said, the day of judgment will not come about until Muslims, somebody asked if there's a difference between Muslims and Muslims. No, it's just a different way of spelling a word that's not written in English. Will not come until Muslims fight the Jews, killing the Jews, when the Jew will hide behind the stones and the trees. Hamas doesn't just hate Israel, Hamas hates Jews, okay? And that is why you are seeing a tremendous rise in anti-Semitism. Don't convince yourself that Hamas is limited to that little tract of land in Gaza. They're all over the place, and their propaganda is all over the place, and they are idolized. When we talk about you know, this recent war, and you hear people glamorizing what Hamas did, in addition to persecuting, you know, innocent Jews and innocent Palestinians, you're turning people who demonize us into international heroes. I think it's important for us to focus a bit of our attention on what's going on with Hamas in the Gaza Strip. You've got to realize that Hamas gets its money, and they openly declare this, it is not a secret, from Iran, who keeps it stocked with weapons. The Biden administration just announced that they are going to send humanitarian aid into Gaza to help rebuild. And the Hamas's response is, don't worry, and this is, you can Google this and find it, don't worry, we don't need that humanitarian aid to protect ourselves. We've got money from Iran. This was just news today or yesterday. So the rockets that they have been launching into Israel, not just beginning last month, it's been going on and on and on. 2 years ago, we took a trip from Ramat Shalom and we visited the town of Sderot, which is on the Gaza border. We stood on the border and we had Hamas militants flashing mirrors in our eyes because they didn't want us to see too close. But the bomb shelters and the bombed out buildings in Israel exist because these missiles come all the time, not just recently. In addition to missiles, they light balloons filled with gasoline and send them in. It causes wildfires, causes houses to catch on fire. And as I'm sure you know, they have a network of tunnels and they burrow in, and sometimes they get into Israel and they wreak havoc, they kill people and or threaten people. This is not a new thing. It has been constant ever since Gaza has been controlled by Hamas, once basically Israel pulled out. You will hear a lot of talk about disproportionate force being used by Israel against Hamas and Gaza. Now, I want to ask you, we are not that far from Cuba. And if Cuba were to launch rockets into South Florida like Hamas did, not out of the realm of possibility, certainly if you look at history, what would we do as a country if it happened day in and day out for weeks and weeks and weeks? What is a balance of power when terrorists are determined to do everything in their power to annihilate you, and they don't hide that desire to annihilate you? When we say there is a disproportionate force being used, we are creating a double standard, because no other country in the world would put up with this. If this happened to the United States with Cuba, I don't think there would be a Cuba. Israel is treated differently than any other country when it comes to the attacks, because of a false narrative that's out there, because people don't know the facts. The thing that I've also heard, and I'm sure you as well, that part of the problem is that the Iron Dome is not fair. The Iron Dome is the missile defense system that, thank God, the United States has helped fund, which intercepts the majority of the missiles that Hamas fires into Israel. And many have said, if it wasn't for the Iron Dome, things would be different. What they're actually saying is, if there were more dead Israelis, things would be different. And that's sick. That's twisted, and that's evil, and that's wrong. There shouldn't be dead people on either side of this equation. What people are overlooking is that Hamas instigates this violence. They set up their missile launchers on the top of apartment buildings, school buildings, mosques. They put their own civilians in harm's way. Many were killed and or hurt because missiles misfired from Hamas into Israel. It didn't land, they landed in Israel instead. They use people as human shields, but nobody talks about that. And when you hear about the death counts as well, of the number of people killed in Gaza, yes, are innocent people killed in Gaza? 100%. Just like innocent people are killed in Israel. But in the death counts that you see from Gaza, who's reporting those numbers? Hamas, to the AP, who they're in bed with, and they're including in there the terrorists who were killed along with folks, and the people who were killed by their own missiles and rockets. I'm not in any way attempting to diminish the death of innocent people, because there are innocent Palestinians over there that are tormented by Hamas just as much as the Israelis are. I want to share this video from the IDF with you to give us a little more insight. Again, a short little clip here for us to look at. Kyle, I understand you want some information on the Sheikh Jarrah. I meant to give that to Cheryl. So if you want that link on the Sheikh Jarrah property, just send her your email and I can send it to you after the class. I know what some of you are thinking. Oh, Rabbi, easy for you to share an IDF, an Israel Defense Force video. Couldn't that be argued as propaganda? And I want to say to you that in the paper today or yesterday, Hamas admits, and you can Google this, that it does hide an attack among civilians, which is a war crime, by the way. It admitted this to Sky News, saying that they feel it is, that international law allows them to wage war by all feasible means, and death is better than being ruled by the Zionists, okay? So out of respect for anybody who questions, what the IDF is trying to say, while the media doesn't promote it, Hamas doesn't hide behind this, but Hamas is careful how they do their marketing. So let's keep in mind the fight that my wife and I had when Ariel Sharon gave Gaza back. I was for it.
Is there a link for that video, by the way?
I can send that as well if somebody wants it. But yeah, if you just Google the header, Hamas use of human shields explained by IDF forces, you should be able to find it on YouTube yourself. The fact is that Israel did what people wanted Israel to do. They gave territory to the Palestinians. There was a Palestinian Authority, there was leadership, there was structure, there was international aid. There's even aid from Israel that's being poured into that area, and it was turned into a terrorist playground. So what do you do with that region where the rulers have no intention of making peace? And we got to think about how Israel deals with Judea and Samaria, or what we call the West Bank, as it negotiates. Has it done a great job negotiating peace? No. Have the Palestinians reached out and attempted to do peace? No. But can you understand Israel's hesitancy? I'm not asking you to become a Bibi Netanyahu fan, okay? He's got lots of faults. But can you understand the hesitancy when it comes to negotiating a peace with people who have demonstrated that when you give land back in such a small area, how dangerous this can be? I want to jump, to the next. So Egypt was the first country that did what UN Resolution 242 required, which was make peace. And Egypt has a good relationship with Israel. Some of you, like me, have traveled into Egypt, traveled into Sinai. And Egypt was working behind the scenes to bring about this quote unquote ceasefire. Jordan was the next country to create a peace deal with Israel. And it was made in 1994. When that happened, who got control of the area we're going to call the West Bank right now, Judea, Samaria? Jordan said, just like Egypt said to Gaza, you know what? Take it. There's a basic Palestinian Authority thing. We're pulling back. By the way, when there was an issue of where Palestinians belonged, Jordan did offer some of the people in the West Bank region citizenship, but then eventually reneged on that citizenship, and that's never really been clarified. But you can see how the Jordanians and the Egyptians and the other Arab countries that attacked and caused all of this, nobody talks about their responsibility in creating a lot of the confusion as to where the Palestinians belong and who's in charge of them. And it's all been dumped on Israel, who now has the responsibility to negotiate borders and boundaries, again, with a group of people that are not, running to make peace themselves. And Mahmoud Abbas, who is the head of the president of the Palestinian Authority and really the head of the region in the West Bank, is a very, very, very weak figure who's uncomfortable with Israel, who's kind of ignored by Jordan, who's ignored by Egypt, and threatened by his own government and Hamas. So what type of peace partner is that? The West Bank is best regarded as a territory over which there are competing claims, which should be resolved in peace process negotiations. We always hope that the United States and other powers and authorities can help make that possible. I know the United Arab Emirates now has a peace deal with Israel, and they're offering perhaps that will bring about some hope there. I do want to talk about the fact that in the West Bank, Israel has what are called settlements, which is often a bad word. Now, settlements are basically usually cities or towns that are created by, established by, continued to be built by Jews, Israelis in that region. There are illegal settlements. And for the most part, they are torn down by the Israeli government. There are settlements that are controversial, but not illegal. Ones that the United States doesn't like, ones that the Palestinians can use to cry foul. But the fact is that a lot of the settlements in Israel, on our trips to Israel, we always go and visit some of them. They are legitimate. They will be part of Israel in a peace plan that is created. Yes, there are right-wing settlers who embrace a theology that is similar in some ways to Hamas, who feels that the Arabs have no claim to the land, which I don't have any patience for. At times, the Netanyahu administration, because it attempts to build a parliamentary power, sometimes affiliates way too much with those. So that's an issue that is a problem that I'm not afraid to acknowledge. But in our own country, we've got presidents and leaders who affiliate with different people associated with different things that no matter what side of the aisle they are on, they make us uncomfortable. But we do have a real issue with Mahmoud Abbas being an incredibly weak figure. And President Biden came out with a statement that many of us were grateful for that says, let's get something straight. Until the region says unequivocally, they acknowledge the right of Israel to exist as an independent Jewish state, there will be no peace. And the region includes Mahmoud Abbas and his political partners who, whether we like it or not, is Hamas, includes Syria, includes Lebanon, includes Saudi Arabia and other Arab nations which have yet to acknowledge the right of Israel to exist. Until that happens, how can we expect Israel to sit down and negotiate a true peace? It's asking Israel to do something. We want Israel to give back territory. So why doesn't Israel just walk away from the West Bank? Well, you look at those boundaries and you look at those borders. This state is about the size of New Jersey, okay? If Israel were to lose control of the full West Bank, Israel would have no security. So Israel has the right given by UN Resolution 242 to negotiate safe and fair boundaries. What Israel needs are partners who accept her right to exist and are capable of sitting down with authority and creating boundaries that are lasting and secure. So we're going to move a little bit out of history into some of the more relevant things. One of you asked some of the specific things about all of the different organizations and people that are out there that are saying things and doing things about Israel. You see members of the squad up on the screen here, which have been spouting some horrific things about Israel. One of the most dangerous and disgusting things is this accusation that Israel is an apartheid regime. Israel is not an apartheid regime. An apartheid regime is one characterized by discriminatory and oppressive laws based on race that deemed one group of people, non-white, as inferior and puts in place legislation in all spheres to support that. It also pertains to the forced removal of people of color from their neighborhoods and relocation to less desirable areas. Is there racism and bigotry and religious discrimination in Israel? 100%. Yes. Are there all of these things in the United States? 100%. How about in the other Middle Eastern countries? You can look at some of these headlines, all of them accurate. Lebanon and Egypt and Saudi Arabia, to name a few, have horrendous civil rights, human rights issues. Religious persecution takes place in other countries. 1,400 Christians were killed by Islamic jihadis in Nigeria. There's been a surge in murders committed by ISIS against anybody in Syria who doesn't follow their belief. That list can go on and on and on and on. The world is broken. Each country, including our own, has problems. But the world loves to target Israel, hold her to a different standard, and berate her in an attempt to undermine her and delegitimize her. And our leaders on our floor of Congress are calling our ally, Israel, an apartheid state. That's a double standard. That's the epitome of anti-Semitism. And to me, this is not a Democrat speaking. This is not a Republican speaking. This is an American Jew speaking and a Zionist speaking. Shame on them for using our political system to demonize the Jewish state and, quite honestly, fan the flames of hate that has spread across our country. This is the type of garbage that justifies the attacks that have gone on in our own community, and it's unacceptable. And I'm grateful to so many in the Democratic Party, leaders on both sides of the aisle, international organizations, other countries who have come out and condemned it. I'm just sick that in our own country, we have to deal with this, but it is a reality. Now, yesterday, this is a headline from the Times of Israel. The Islamic nations, a lot of the same nations who went against Israel in all the other wars, including some of the Islamic nations in Southeast Asia and in Africa, asked the UN to form an unprecedented permanent panel to critique Israel after the most recent violence. And just before I logged online, guess what? The United Nations Human Rights Committee approved that. An unprecedented, open-ended, never before done investigation of the state of Israel and condemnation of the state of Israel for the recent actions, with not one mention of Hamas or the missiles fired at Israel or the deaths of innocent people in Israel. And I want you to look at the green yeses, the countries that vote yes, and you can see one thing that links them together. And I'm sorry to say it, because I wish there was better relations in the world between Muslims and Jews, and goodness knows we need it. But the Muslim world still does not want Israel to exist. This is a theme that we've talked about throughout the night, and it's something that we in America have to work very hard on with our Muslim brothers and sisters. Now, I will tell you, some of the greatest advocates for peace in the Middle East are Muslims. You go to Israel, Muslims and Jews get along. There are Muslims who I follow online and I've met on Twitter and elsewhere who are pro-Israel and see the lies. So I don't want to make this about bashing the Muslim community. However, internationally, the Muslim nations have come out against Israel. Plus, some of these countries here, and I put some of these headlines here, Eritrea and Ethiopia are doing horrific things against people. China is persecuting Muslims as we speak. And the Muslim world stands with China right now to condemn Israel. As the Israeli president posted just before class when he saw this, he said, the world has turned upside down, that this could be allowed to happen. It's disgusting and it reeks of anti-Semitism. So let me catch my breath as we share this next video from a very powerful website that will be at the link at the end called honestreporting.com. They take all the regular headlines about Israel and they analyze them. I go on there every day. It's a very good resource for any of us.
All of Israel. But
Sorry,
is any
hold
of
on
what they say actually?
Why that started there?
College campuses promote an annual Israel Apartheid Week. Apartheid.org says they work to raise awareness of Israel's colonialist and apartheid policies across, quote, historic Palestine, which is the phrase they use to describe all of Israel. But is any of what they say actually true? Apartheid is racial segregation, specifically a former policy of segregation and political and economic discrimination against non-European groups in the Republic of South Africa. Israel is nothing of the kind. To the contrary, it has 1.7 million Arab citizens, full citizens with full equal rights, including 18 members of Knesset, that's the Israeli parliament, of the religions Druze, Bedouin, and Sunni Muslim. There is an Arab-Israeli Supreme Court justice, a mayor, enough doctors and lawyers to make even a Jewish mother proud, actors, models, news anchors, athletes, soldiers, singers. What there is not is separate water fountains, separate toilets, separate public transportation, or any of the typical features of racial segregation. Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, and the only country in the Middle East with equal rights for all religions, genders, and sexual orientations. Israel, in reality, is the exact opposite of everything that the word apartheid actually means. Slogans can be misleading. Apartheid.org is merely anti-truth and anti-Israel. And chances are they'll be on your college campus or your children's college campus within the next months. We put college campuses.
So there are you can be an Israeli and be Arab, Muslim, Christian, Bedouin. He said that. And a lot of the Palestinians who live in Israel are citizens of Israel. The people who live in the area that we call the West Bank, many of them are not Israeli citizens. Remember, Palestine wants its own country. They are part of what will become the nation of Palestine. Israel gets a lot of heat for that, saying that they don't have the same rights. They don't want to be Israeli citizens. They don't want to be part of the nation of Israel. There is a Palestinian Authority with its own government, and the world needs to help Mahmoud Abbas get his act together and get his country together so that those people can get what they need from that government. And that's incredibly important for us to keep in mind as we talk about. We talked about the security border that exists on the West Bank, which has created difficult situations for some of the Palestinians who need to cross into Israel for work. They can cross in. Palestinians can cross into Israel for medical reasons. And in fact, the head of Hamas, his niece is currently in the hospital in Tel Aviv. In the hospital, she's been there since he's been bombing Israel. So nobody can say, and you can Google it and it's on there. Nobody can say that that Palestinians don't get the ability to access hospitals. There's incredibly beautiful stories that come out of Israel for that. And Israel also provides aid to the Palestinians, including Gaza. And we're almost done, and we'll open things up to some bigger questions. I know that your head might be going, but two or three more slides, and we're gonna have some open talk if there are any open questions.
Humanitarian. Many are calling it a major humanitarian crisis as Israel vows to intensify its bombing campaign.
The humanitarian situation continues to deteriorate dramatically.
Israeli airstrikes on Gaza continued, fueling a humanitarian crisis.
Many are calling
A couple more pieces here. Our Secretary of State, Blinken, came out yesterday to say that Israel took very significant steps to avoid hitting Gaza civilians. Israel, despite what people want to say, despite the propaganda that's out there, Israel does not target civilians. Are there mistakes? We forget that it's war. This isn't a game. It's not a video game. It's war, and mistakes happen, and that's horrific. Hamas targets civilians to destroy the state of Israel.
Do you have links for these videos?
Yes, so we'll share all of these slides. I'm happy if you want me to email them to you. We'll post it online, and if you do want actual links for the videos, just send us an email, and we'll send out a more comprehensive list. So ramat.shalom@ramat.shalom.org, or just message Rabbi Cheryl, and she can get it, and we can send you the links directly. But we'd be happy to send you all of the slides, which include this, and we'll post it online too. We talked about how the death counts are also not accurate, so I think that that's important for us to keep in mind. The New Yorker Union came out the other day, May 19th, with this tweet: solidarity with Palestinians from the river to the sea. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, is an anti-Semitic chant that promotes a false narrative, calls for the destruction of Israel, the ethnic cleansing or genocide of the Jewish people, and legitimates hate crimes directed against Jews across the globe. When we hear it or we read it, we have to call it out for what it is, for hate. We talked about the fact that anti-Semitism has jumped by 80% in the US alone. We are being held, American Jews, collectively responsible for the actions of Israel. This is, according to the IHRA definition, anti-Semitic. The propaganda, the double standards, the misinformation, the ignorance, the anti-Israel sentiments spewed by our leaders, by celebrities and others, all because Israel has had to defend herself. The rewriting of history is putting us all in harm's way. And the solution is not to ignore it or to run from it, because it's not going to go away. The answer is not to hide our Judaism. I know it can be scary, but the answer lies, one, in investing in our own security, which of course we do at our synagogue. And this includes safety measures, but it also includes education, learning the facts. Too many of us have taken for granted our own safety and security and the well-being of Israel. Doing all of this involves courage, including the courage to share the truth and let your Judaism, your love of the Jewish people, your Zionism, be lights during this incredibly dark time. I want to finish in a moment with this little video. But I want to share with you the words of, again, Chen Mazig, who I've talked about a bunch of times. He tweeted earlier today, we talk a lot about the Holocaust and the idea never again. And he says, never again cannot be just a slogan. It has to be a promise that we all keep. And never again involves learning the facts and being able to share the facts. And one of the facts is that Israel, there's some groups out there, including Jewish groups, who are saying, well, we don't need Israel anymore. I've never heard something more offensive. We as Americans, we're comfortable here, but there's lots of Jews all over the world who need Israel. And there's lots of Jews who have lived in Israel for centuries. Lots of Jews who lived in Israel for decades who need Israel. It's their home. The Jewish world deserves Israel. To say that we don't need it anymore is an absurdity. This was a tweet that was posted by Isaac Herzog, who's actually running for president of Israel. He's the head of the Jewish Agency, which is in charge of the people who are moving to Israel from other countries. And this was posted he was visiting some of the Olim, the immigrants to Israel. I want you to look at the skin color and ethnicity of these people moving to Israel, see themselves draped in flags. But what I want you to realize is this was filmed while they were hiding in a bomb shelter on the 14th as they were getting bombed. And he went down to be with these young kids and they sang some songs just to keep them calm. But this is just a reminder of why Israel needs to exist. Hold on one second. I want to make this big so you can experience this here. Sharing is paused? Oops. Hold on. I don't know why it says sharing is paused. Hold on. I see why. Hold on one second, my friends. Here we go. Hold on. I want to share that one video with you. Here we go.
לראות שאתם בסדר, ואני חייב לומר שאתם מדהימים. התשובה הכי טובה לכלים של החמאס. nadie agarra su coral, le invito a usted y llevo la luz que
So we will share, I also asked Cheryl if she can to post some of the news sites and other resources we mentioned. Did you post those? So if you would like the slides, if you want more resources, if you want links to the videos, I'm happy to share any of it with you. I encourage you to do your own research, your own work into things. I remain constantly available to anybody who has questions. Ramat Shalom at ramatshalom.org. If there are questions now, I invite you to ask those questions. I know I have kept you for 2 very long hours, and Cheryl tells me that we've maintained basically everybody who started with us, which impresses me because I talked a lot. I hope it was informative. I know it was a lot, but your presence here tonight is just so incredibly important, and I thank you for being here.
Will you automatically send out a copy of the presentation to everybody?
We can send it out to everybody who registered. If you gave us your email, we certainly can do that. It might take a day or two for us to upload it all and things like that, but if you would like, we can certainly do that. I don't want to harass anybody's email, but yes, we can send it out. Yep, absolutely. Any other questions? I see people raising hands. Please don't raise hands because we don't really have the way to do it. Please type your question in the Q&A box so that we can see the question. I thank everybody for all of the thank yous. It is passionate for me, and I appreciate, again, you being here and listening and hopefully learning. Any other questions, guys? Well, if not, I wish everybody a good night. May the innocent souls in Israel and the innocent souls in Palestine find some peace. And may you find within yourself the courage to be an advocate for all of that. I'm sorry, Sandy, we can watch the recording, but can those, yes, the recording, once the recording uploads, which usually takes a few hours, it will be shared. So if you weren't able to be here tonight, we definitely will be available to folks to watch 100%, 100%. Thank you, everybody.
Is there any young Palestinians that have the courage to call for truth?
Kyle, do we have Kyle's email?
Yeah,
Okay, because I don't want to give you the wrong information now, but there's a couple amazing folks in Israel. So yes, there are. And I'd be happy to, I wish that my memory was good so I could just give it to you right now, but Kyle, I can send you some people. If you're on Twitter, they're great, 100%. I don't want people to leave here thinking, you know, that there is none of that. There are young Palestinians and young Israelis who are doing great things together. So please, please, please keep that in mind. Good question. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful night. Any last minute, if there's other questions, ramatshalom@ramatshalom.org. Happy to talk to you. I'm on social media too. Contact me there. Sometimes it takes me a little time to get in touch with folks there. Kyle, thank you. You're on Twitter, good. So find me on Twitter, Rabbi Jacobs, and I'll probably send you too many things. Yeah, I want to put you in touch with some of those people you talked about. Good job, everybody. Thanks for being here. Have a good night.